Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar, mini webinar. Today the subject is risk appetite, and this is part of our lunchtime learning series. We keep them short. It'll be just 15 minutes, including the introduction. It's just me. I have just 10 slides and I'll get you out of here in 15 minutes. So we refer to this as risk management in small bites. For a word of introduction for those of you who don't know us, we as in calQrisk, we see ourselves as risk and compliance professionals, like many of you. Yes, we produce a software, but it's, I think, by keeping our skills sharp and understanding the issues around governance, risk and compliance, that we can better support you in finding a solution to the challenges you have. We keep our skills sharp by members of Institute of Risk Management, Institute of Bankers, Institute of Directors, Compliance Ireland, I think that's the Chartered Accountants, and I'm a member of ISACA, that's Information Security. So we try to keep our skills sharp. Personally, I'm involved in the standards development. I chair the National Committee on ISO 31000 in Ireland, and I represent Ireland on the ISO TC, that's the Technical Committee for Risk Management Standards, TC 362. Yes, we supply a solution, a governance, risk and compliance solution. That's not what it's about today. Happy to take inquiries. We have many customers in the financial services sector, whether it's credit unions, fund management, investment management, insurance brokers, quite a breadth of financial service organizations, and also the not-for-profit, sports, charities, housing associations. Many of you are on the call today. I like this one. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. Now, the older members among you will remember Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay. You know, if you want to achieve anything, you're going to have to take some risk. Isn't that true? Really? You know, if you don't take a risk, as Muhammad Ali would say, you probably won't achieve anything. But the big question is, how much risk will you take? How much are you willing to take? And on a personal level, it differs greatly. Some people will bet on horses, bet on games. Other people have a total aversion to betting because of various risks. But as an organization, you take risks as well. And what the regulator and what common sense would tell you is you got to, at some level, decide on how much risk you're willing to take in pursuit of your objectives. And if you look at these definitions here from ISO, the Financial Stability Board and the Central Bank of Ireland, or the UK Corporate Governance Code, they're all saying the same thing, that you've got to decide as an organization on how much risk you're willing to take in pursuit of your objectives. Now, interestingly, the UK Corporate Governance Code removed risk appetite from the as a word, but they left in the other words effectively describing it. I know in the international community, half the risk experts don't like the phrase risk appetite because it sounds like you're seeking risk. It's not. We'll see hopefully today, it's setting the limits for decision makers in your organization as to how much risk you will accept. Very simple. So let's have a look. How much is too much? Well, understand your risk capacity first. That is the maximum. This is a definition from the Financial Stability Board and from Central Bank. They agree on this definition, that risk capacity, and that is how much risk you could technically assume before breaching constraints determined by capital, your borrowing capacity, regulations, reputation and operational environment. Now, you know, regulations and borrowing capacity, these things are fairly, let's say, well known and can be defined, but operational environment, that is, I suppose, the area of greatest variability, and you need to understand that. So I would say understand your capability, your risk management capability, because this is the greatest determinant of that variable element on the capacity. Let me explain. If you're doing what you're doing for 20 years, then you probably have well-seasoned procedures and policies, and you probably have people well trained in their jobs. So you have skills and knowledge, and you have the controls and you have the oversight. So you can probably take more risk. Whereas if you're new to the business and you've got a lot of new staff with not many years' experience, your capability and therefore your capacity to take risk is less. So before you set the appetite, understand your capacity, understand what you're good at, understand what, where you have the expertise. I'll quote Charles F. Sharp from Visa. He said, "A well-controlled environment gives you the license to do other things." If you have good controls in place, because you've been doing this for a while, if you have the skills and knowledge in those controls, you can take on more risk. Now, I've tried to show diagrammatically here. You can't really set the appetite until you understand your capacity. If you do set the appetite in ignorance of your capacity, you're risking setting the appetite too high. So I would say spend some time understanding your capacity. And if I'm speaking to you, it's the board members who decide on the risk appetite for the organization. Yes, they'll be advised by management, but the board need to assess and understand and be able to judge what is the capacity of this organization that they're directing and controlling before agreeing to any appetite. If you're a larger organization, and on this call today, we have from the small to the very large, so it's a challenge to speak to that breadth, but if you're a larger organization, then the regulator will look for, and you probably need, a risk appetite framework. And some of you will groan at another framework, but just look at it as a kind of a guide to how am I going to organize this. If you've got 10 business units and you need to write an appetite, then you need to write an appetite that has relevance for each of the 10 units. So you need to agree an overall approach to appetite. Just at the highest level, have a policy, and saying the policy you're going to cover the whole organization, have processes for gathering the information to understand your capacity. You make people responsible in each business unit for gathering this information and collating it and bringing it back and discussing it. You will certainly ensure that it's aligned with your strategy. After all, it's, how much risk are you willing to take in pursuit of the objectives? So an alignment is, if you like, understood, but don't forget. Considering the existing risk profile, that's probably a key determinant of understanding your risk capacity. If you look at the risks and see what you're managing well, if you have a lot of risks, high risks, and your controls are not very effective, then your capacity is low. So if you have good understanding of your risks, and the risks are, for you, let's say, well controlled, I won't say low, but well controlled, you might say we have greater capacity to take on more risk. And then you need to consider, how do you get the message out there in the organization? How do you embed it in the culture? And this is important. If you've decided on limits for whatever it is, for a project, for an investment, for a loan, you need to make sure that the people making decisions are aware of those limits. That's what this is about. It's the appetite is setting the limits for the decision makers in the organization. And finally, in that appetite framework, you need to make sure that you don't set it once and forget. You need to, certainly in these changing times, keep an eye on the market changes, because it may influence your appetite. Your appetite may go up or it may go down, but you need to be monitoring it. So that's the framework. Now, my graphic here is my version of the risk-return graphic. You often see risk versus return as a straight line, and it looks like, well, the more risk we take on, the more profit we will make. If you're taking on more risk, be aware that the fall could be harder. That's the blue bit in this. Yes, you might make more money, but you might lose more money as well. So I think your appetite might be in that vertical line as to how much risk are you going to take. Okay. Not many minutes left on this risk appetite statement. I think, where do you start? You might start with the objectives to try and start defining things. And the first place is decide which objective is more important than the other, primacy or priority. People's health and safety is more important than making money, that sort of thing. Write it down. You will take risks, and you will decide not to do things. So if you're in a credit union, you might say we will lend to people who want to go on holidays, but we won't lend to people who want to speculate on land purchase. If you're in the housing building business, there might be particular types of housing or particular geographies that you won't build in. These are all statements of appetite, of things you will and will not do. So if the statements are the words, the limits are the numbers. And you might start at a big number, like saying we will invest 33% of our spare cash. You might have to disaggregate that and say, well, 10% will be long-term, 10% medium-term, and the rest short-term. You might further disaggregate it into say what kind of investments you will make. Be aware of the constraints. Be aware of constraints by the regulator. If the regulator says you need to keep a reserve of 10%, you might decide, well, we'll keep a reserve at 12% and keep that buffer there. That's a statement of appetite. And think of it, if you said 12% and the next person said we'll keep a reserve of 10.5, what are they saying? We're willing to go closer to the wind, say closer to the wind. Now, the good news is you probably have a lot of these statements already expressed in various policies that you have in the organization. Certainly it is my experience that the risk appetites tend to be distributed. It is a worthwhile exercise to bring these back into one document and structures. You will find, I think, ambiguity, and you will find contradictions. Another appetite statement is if you have zero tolerance for something, then zero tolerance for non-compliance, for example, with legal obligations, say it. That is also an appetite statement. Now, if you are setting limits, and you are, when you set an appetite, you should be measuring as well. You all hopefully have some key risk indicators that you're measuring. I tend to break them up into these 4 categories that I borrowed from a lady called Ariane Chappelle. Exposure indicators, changes in the nature of the business environment, that you need to be aware of. It might affect your decisions, like an investment return or unemployment rate. Stress indicators, you're growing, you're busy, your staff are getting busier, they're getting sick because they're worked off their feet. Be aware of that. Systems are failing more often. They're down. Why? Possibly because of the age. Causal indicators, these are a bit more distant, but if you have open positions and you're not able to hire people because it's an employee marketplace, they're going to cause you problems down the road. Get the earliest indicators you can. Failure indicators, I think most of us measure anyway. The number of complaints, the number of audit findings, measure them. These are really telling you if you're sailing close to the wind and about to deviate from your own risk appetite. And finally, I would say, spend some time considering how you're going to ensure that that message gets through. I say communication. We often fail to communicate. Printing a policy, publishing it on your intranet is not communication. You need to ensure that all the decision makers are aware of the limits. And if you start by writing the appetite, it has to get into the policies. I suggested look in policies and see what's in there already, but then complete the cycle and correct the policies and disaggregate, as I said, as you need. And of course, then it's about managing risk. So this appetite should be reflected in your risk criteria. There should be an alignment there. Now, that was all very quick, a nugget, and we've hit the 15 minutes, but we'll take a couple of questions. Thank you. I see there's one in there. Anonymous. What is your view on changing the qualitative and quantitative parameters that were defined for various appetites, e.g. low, medium, low, if, for example, the business asset size grew significantly since the appetite parameters were not set originally and they now warrant a review? Is it a bad idea to change the parameters, or is it okay to change and not to change date so that trends for, let's say, low risk appetites are known not to be so accurate after the change date until some time has passed and enough new data exists to extract new trends? Okay. There's a few elements to that. First of all, if you say we have low appetite for something, personally, I would say, I don't know what that means. And if you say to 10 people, you'll get 10 different interpretations of what low appetite means. If you say to an IT guy, we have no appetite for IT outages, to an IT person who thinks like maybe an engineer will say, that means systems can never go down. Triple my budget. I don't think that's a useful way of expressing appetite, to say low. If you say low, you need to qualify it and put a number in there. Otherwise, what are people to understand? And the same with medium and high. I think you have to qualify it. Now, if you get it wrong and people come back and say, this appetite is too low, you're restricting what we can do, we need to, loosen it a bit. That's fine. Appetites aren't set in stone. There are guidance until you've got that feedback. So I think set it, and when you've got that experience, change it if necessary. Absolutely. But yeah, if you use low or medium, explain it. How much detail should be included in the RAS, risk appetite statement? How many pages? Okay. Depending on your business, I would say if you've got, I'm going to say 7 objectives in your organization, then I'd be looking at a half a page, A4 page per objective to clarify that. But then it depends who the document is for. If you've an organization with 10 business units, then it might be longer because you might have to do that disaggregation. So if it's for external parties, there'll be a high level, but I'm talking about 2 or 3 pages, not 43 pages. But then if you're a big bank, certainly it will grow because it will be 2 or 3 pages for every business unit, I guess. But don't take a page limit as a direction from me. There's another question, Ger. Is having a tolerance an effective buffer? Can these often be too restrictive, and should the RAS include trigger actions, or should that be a strategy plan? I avoid the word tolerance myself, because tolerance in ISO terms is the capacity. But I think what you mean is having a kind of an amber area. And if we take that regulatory reserve that we're talking about, the legal constraint says you've got to have 10%. You might say we put a buffer in there, and I prefer to call it a buffer than a tolerance, because I'm an engineer and it means different things. So let's say you have a buffer of 2%. I think you need to have at least, you said trigger, yeah, it's probably a good name for it. Be measuring that, call it a key risk indicator. And if your key risk indicator is what buffer do we have now, what reserve do we have, and it goes to 11.9, then that might be an amber flag to say we're now in the buffer zone, or if you call it the tolerance. I think it's a good idea to have that. You don't want surprises, Ger. Is having tolerance okay? Nessa, do you need to set proximity alert and breach metrics in relation to each appetite? I don't know what proximity metrics, alert and breach metrics in relation to each appetite. Let me try and understand that. I think you do need, if something is critical, and if breaching an appetite could cause you serious reputational or regulatory problems, then you need to have certainly a metric and key risk indicator. I had a slide on it. Some kind of a key risk indicator that says to you, you are coming close to breaching it. And that's maybe what the proximity is, that buffer. Certainly, you don't want to be surprised. Think of key risk indicators as trends. If your buffer was 14% in January and 13% in February and 12.5% in March, be aware of that trend. Don't wait until it comes to 11.9 to say, oh, we're in the amber. Be aware of these trends. And the best way I think of seeing those is with key risk indicators. Something you're measuring, it might be just every month or every quarter. It depends on the rate of change of that metric. Certainly, if you do breach your own appetite, that needs to immediately come to the attention of the CEO and possibly the board, depending on the nature of it. You certainly need to be capturing that. Otherwise, how do you explain that to a regulator? You set an appetite and you didn't know you breached your own appetite. Okay, folks, I think we could probably go on for longer, and I realized when we started this today that it was going to be tight for 15 minutes. But look, if there's strong interest, we'll do a longer session on risk appetite. Thank you for your attention. Hope you got something from that. Bye-bye.